and I will start now.
Hello everyone, it's a pleasure to be here presenting this session of the Virtual Summit. My name is Guillermo and I work as an operational excellence consultant for Zurich in Spain. As an AX member, I'm co-leading the external connection role along with Janzen. For those who doesn't know us, Next is a grassroots movement within Zurich promoting intergenerational dialogue. You can go to the next slide, please. Our goal is to give a voice to the new generations to future-proof the companies with regards to their role as a service or product provider, employer, and corporate citizen. In this map, you can see how our core team is distributed. And if you go to the next slide, this is our current local hubs that we hope they will continue to expand. We want everyone to be represented and to be part of the decision-making of the companies. To achieve this, we have launched different initiatives like Next Voice, where we can find a place to share projects, products, or ideas, or a way for different generations to engage in meaningful conversations and learn from one another through our cross-mentoring program. But the reason why we are here today is because of the connection of Next with other movements and companies. That is why we offer Next Talks regularly every year, and we celebrate the Virtual Summit in which we have speakers from all over the world to share their ideas and expertise with all of us. To introduce you to our panelists and the topic of this session, let me introduce you to my colleague, Rebecca Santos.
Thanks, Guillermo. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the panel discussion today. I'm Rebecca Santos. I am a global operational sustainability consultant with Zurich, and I am also a member of the Next movement. Today, I'm just going to quickly introduce you to our panelists before we get started. From the Zurich side, we have David Nash. He's joining us from the Zurich Foundation. He's going to share some insights from COP26 and the Great Climate Change Adaptation focus work being driven through our flood resilience program. Then we're going to go ahead and shift the conversation into climate change mitigation. And we have Anya Fischer, who is the head of operational sustainability, and Darren Lawson, who is the head of document logistics here at Zurich as well. They'll show an overview of Zurich's operational sustainability strategy with a deep dive into the challenges and opportunities with digitization. And we're also delighted today to have with us Henning Müller. He is the Country Quality and Food Safety Manager of Coca-Cola HBC Switzerland. Henning is going to share with us some examples of challenges and opportunities around sustainability for a multinational company like Coca-Cola. So to go ahead and kick us off, let's go ahead and have David go first.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, Rebecca, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening to all of our listeners today. My name is David Nash. I am the Senior Manager for Climate Change Adaptation and Partnerships with the Zurich Foundation. We've been operating in this field now for over 8 years, looking at this issue through the lens of flood resilience. And today I'd like to share with you a little bit of an insight into what climate change means from the Foundation's point of view. You will have heard, I'm sure, a lot about climate change over the last few weeks. COP26 is a piece of jargon that has been floating around a little bit. It is the UN Climate Change Summit. Basically, each year, countries that are signatories to the UN's Framework Convention on Climate Change, tripping over what the acronym actually means, but there you go. The UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, 196 countries have signed up to that, and they come together once a year to talk about how they can tackle climate change. Climate change falls into two broad buckets, and I'll be focusing on, as Rebecca has said, the adaptation side of things, because that's where the Foundation comes from, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. But the other angle of it, and you've seen a lot about this in the papers, is all on climate change mitigation. It's looking at this issue of saying the world is heating up, the world is heating up fast, and that is causing huge amounts of problems in terms of extreme weather events that have impacts upon ordinary people. We need to find a way as a world of trying to control that, trying to put a lid on top of this global warming, and our target following the COP summit in 2015 in Paris was to say let's keep it below 2 degrees and if possible below 1.5 degrees. COP26 in Glasgow this year was postponed, 5th anniversary of the Paris Agreement, and the intention at this particular event was to say how are we doing, what are our pledges to try and overcome the challenges, are we on the right kind of track? And the COP presidency, which was held by the UK on this particular occasion, had this tagline of keeping 1.5 alive. So the idea being that we really needed to focus in on how we were going to do that. Each country has what they call a nationally determined contribution. The NDC is something that they are pushing each country to adopt, to find ways in which they can reduce their emissions and manage this climate crisis. And there were some great promises that came out of announcements throughout the first week in particular from different countries on what their new NDC targets were going to be. Those great comments were analysed during the last couple of weeks, and it's shown that they're perhaps baby steps rather than significant steps, moving into the kind of direction that they were talking about. The last numbers that I saw was that we were likely, if all NDC promises were fulfilled, we were likely to be able to cap global temperature rises at 2.4 degrees. That's significantly better than we're tracking at the moment, which is looking closer to 2.7 or even 3 degrees, but it's still nowhere near the 1.5 we actually need. The COP presidency described it yesterday as the COP 1.5 was still alive, but it had a very faint pulse. So we still need to do an awful lot more work to try and make that happen, and that's if all the promises are kept. It's really difficult for some countries to keep some of these promises. You may well have seen, may well have heard some commentary around reforestation over the last, or deforestation rather, stopping deforestation over the last couple of weeks. 100 countries or so signed up to a pact to stop deforestation. Indonesian environment minister went home and 2 days later reneged on the deal and decided that it wasn't in Indonesia's best interests. And that's largely because we have to fight this this challenge, this kind of contradiction between development on the one hand and allowing a country to help its population become more prosperous, and climate change on the other. And so there needs to be some efforts made to a compensatory mechanism to enable countries to move in that direction, which unfortunately was missing from this particular COP. The interesting thing, though, about this COP is something that hasn't happened for a number of events, which was talking about adaptation. And if we can go on to the next slide, please, I'd just like to share with you a couple of numbers around adaptation. The world promised when we went to Paris in 2015 to put 100 billion a year into climate finance, 50% of which was supposed to go to adaptation. You'll see from this chart that in the latest numbers in 2019, about 80 billion went into the funnel in the top, but only about 25% of that went to adaptation. Now, that sounds like we're just halfway there, and if we could only double that, then maybe we'd be on the right kind of track. But if we then drill down underneath that a little bit, I think it kind of shows the scale of the problem we're dealing with. The amount of the money that went to least developed countries, those that are at the front line, the ones that are most vulnerable, was only 40% of the total adaptation funding to least developed countries. The rest was earmarked and kept for countries that are making the contributions in the first place. And even worse than that, only 10% of that money actually reached the grassroots. So there's a huge amount of effort that's required at the moment for only 1% of climate finance to reach people at the sharp end where things really need to happen. A little piece on the side, it takes 4 years for a country to apply through the process to even get that 1%. So there's a significant challenge with access. There's a significant challenge with the amount of funding that goes into adaptation. And that's also reflected in the private sector setup. The last numbers that I saw, and I really wish I had a source for this because I can't remember where it came from now, apart from a review of the Green Climate Fund. Within the Green Climate Fund, this gathers together all of these contributions, whether they're from public sector or whether they're from the private sector. of all the private sector contributions, less than 0.1% of them went towards adaptation. So one of the challenges that the foundation is facing is how do we take a stand and push this idea that the private sector is not just about mitigation, important though that is, it's also about adaptation. And how can the foundation be a beacon to show what that looks like? How can we help people come and join us on that journey? If we go on to the next slide, please, Max. The way in which we work through what's called the Zurich Flood Resilience Programme, which is also moving out into a more climate resilience view, just extending in the US actually to look at heat waves as well as to flooding. And the way in which we work is very different to traditional programming. We start off by looking at how a community is affected by climate change right now and its vulnerabilities. That gives us a baseline number and a direction for putting in place projects. We put the projects in place and then remeasure. Now, this whole measurement piece is something that is entirely unique to the Zurich Flood Resilience Alliance, which are the group of organisations that are working it. We're trying to share that more widely, and we're moving that out into the wider picture of more climate hazards. If we can go on to the next slide, please, just to finish off this piece. The thing about resilience is that it's often viewed as a choice between taking resilience action or helping people be more developed and to kind of fulfill the sustainable development goals. One of the things that we have found is that resilience and sustainable development are two sides of the same coin. They are effectively the same thing. If you can develop in the right way, if we can meet the 17 sustainable development goals in the right way, we will build resilience. If we build resilience in the right way, we will help to meet all 17 of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And this is a really important thing to take to policymakers and to funders and to the private sector to say, hey, if you're interested in sustainable development, then you need to be interested in resilience as well, and we can help you do that. Sorry, I overran a little bit. I'll close at this particular point. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Such important work being done by the foundation. It's fantastic. So I would like to go ahead and maybe Anya and Darren, maybe you could share with our participants how Zurich is tackling climate change through our own operations.
That would be fabulous. Yeah, so Darren and I are going to give an overview on first kind of the big picture, basically how does Zurich do sustainability from an operational perspective, and then I'm going to hand it over to Darren to give a view into the surprisingly complex world of paper and the challenges we have around moving to digital. So Zurich's approach to sustainability is really based on good governance practices of transparency and accountability. One of the cornerstones, right, of course, to our approach is making sure we set ambitious, credible targets and that we publicly report against them. So we've just released our science-based emissions reduction targets earlier this year to reduce our emissions in our operations by 50% by 2025 and then 70% by 2029. We've already achieved a big chunk with 2020, but we all know that was largely driven by the pandemic, and the challenge now is to ensure, as we kind of transition forward, to ensure that we take lessons that we've learned, good behaviors that we've learned, and we carry on with them. External commitments, right? So external commitments to indices, right, that are like the climate group, that we don't define the methodologies, right, to hold ourselves accountable. We've done this with our commitment to EV100. We will electrify our car fleet by 2029, and then we also have an RE100 commitment, the goal to have 100% renewable power by next year. I'm very happy that we did progress on that target, you know, despite COVID during 2020. We moved from a 50% renewable power mix to 74% during the year, and I'm hoping we increase that number even further this year, and it looks like we are on the path to do so. Zurich's also been carbon neutral since 2014, and I think this is a space that often gets criticized, but I think it's an extremely important space. So what we do through our carbon neutrality commitment is we actually enable funding of some fantastic environmental and social programs through, in our case, through keeping forests around, right? So we're currently investing in avoided carbon emissions offsetting certificates. And we're actually also looking at how we can start on the path to net zero for our operations. So that's a very exciting space of moving from, not only avoided carbon, but also solutions to remove carbon from the atmosphere. It's also incredibly important when we look at sustainability that it is a holistic approach, right? So we do have other activities going on, for example, in sustainable IT infrastructure, our move to cloud, et cetera, but also within our supply chain. I think this is a massive opportunity to really influence our suppliers. And one of the key things we've accomplished this year is we've defined a new supplier code of conduct that defines our environmental, social, and ethical expectations from our suppliers. And similarly, right, when you start thinking about, well, we could be doing the same for our customers, which is, of course, what we are doing through our other external commitments in our underwriting, and then further in our investments. Another really exciting thing that we've launched this year is a carbon fund. So we've set an internal price on carbon, and we've used that money to help emissions reduction initiatives. And I can say that hopefully we'll be communicating about this in the future, some of the fantastic initiatives that have been enabled through this fund, and that really would not have happened if this funding wasn't available. It's very, very frustrating at times. Sometimes sustainability initiatives can't get off the ground. Maybe, maybe we're talking $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 in funding that they couldn't get. So it's really exciting seeing the types of projects and innovation and ideas that are being inspired by the fact that this funding is available. And another important element of our operational approach is, of course, our employee engagement, right? If you think Zurich, population 55,000, what can we do if we leverage and empower that group of people? So one of the cornerstones of our approach is through a huge program which we do in September for our climate month. We do a Green Week Wednesdays, which is grassroots, employee-driven events, information sessions. From across the globe. It's a very exciting, very fun event. And we also have a network of champions. So it's really ensuring we have representation and engagement across all of our BUs and leveraging that passion that we have within our employee base. Recently, we've also announced these 5 sustainability aspirations. So it's really building on the work that we've done, but kind of setting it like a little bit on fire, putting a little bit more pressure to get things done quicker. So we've made this big commitment to keep our air travel 70% below what it used to be in 2019. So we've learned behaviors and new engagement patterns, and I mean the way we've been able to use technology over the past year and a half, we need to be able to maintain that behavior. So we've actually made this commitment to the 70% permanent reduction. We're also looking at building a sustainable food program. So again, building on a lot of the great work that's already happening, let's ensure we have a consistent high quality standard to how we're providing food to our employees, but then of course, again, leveraging that employee engagement piece and ensuring we're bringing them on the journey with us in terms of how they really can eat in a healthy, sustainable manner. Our car fleet target, I mentioned before, we have the target to have 100% electric by end of 2029. Well, we're aiming to have a ICE-free or internal combustion engine-free fleet, or pure ICE-free fleet by 2025. So that would be only hybrid and electrics by 2025. We're also looking at our sustainable buildings. We have some really fantastic headquarter buildings across the globe with, LEED Platinum, DGNB, Gold, these really great sustainability ratings, but we want to ensure that we're bringing sustainability to all our offices ultimately. So we're working on a program right now that helps us understand, what is a sustainable building and what are these requirements, and then really kind of bringing that across our portfolio with the aim to have 50 sites included by end of 2022. And then we have another really, really big one around paper and ensuring that we become fully digital, especially in terms of our customer communications. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Darren to give you more details.
Thanks, Anya. And if we can just move to the next slide. So I'm going to build on what Anya was talking about there, in particular around this paper piece. And as Anya said, it's not as simple as it seems. Just to stop using paper. We'd all love just to remove the photocopiers and take away the printers, but sometimes there's a little bit more complexity around that. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is really some of the challenges that we see and some of the opportunities, and then obviously the benefits that drives on our journey towards digital. So first of all, paper. Some people traditionally see that as a bit of an anchor, one of the reasons why they come to the office. So traditionally your filing would be in the office, or your paperwork, you have a desk, that type of location. The printing facilities would all be there, the post room facilities. So it really was a reason that drove people into the office. And then of course there's the cost side of things. Now, it's not just the cost of printing, there's a lot of associated costs that come with that. The purchasing of the paper, the printing of the paper, all the peripherals and consumables around that, the storage of paper. I'm not just talking about a filing cabinet here or there. Some offices, some locations have big roller racking, big storage in their offices, which costs an awful lot to maintain and install. And then there's of course the distribution side of things. So the mailing costs, the courier costs, often a document could go from one person to another, so it's not always a single transaction. And then we've got the inefficient side of it. It takes time, people have to process things get lost, things have to be copied, which version have we got, which one are we using? It's a lot more complex. And of course, there's in this world of data protection, GDPR, absolutely, we've got to look after the data and the information that we have, and paper is a lot less secure. We always hear stories of people leaving files that are sensitive in bus stops, or leaving in the boot of their car, which then gets stolen. So there's those sort of challenges, and there are a lot more around this, but there's some of the key ones. So what do we see as the opportunities? Firstly, I think clearly digital enablement can really help remove some of these barriers. Recently we've been deploying tools like digital mail, hybrid print, which for us, hybrid print is around, actually you could be in any location, press print, and in the old days it would go to your local printer in your office, which you would then go and collect your print. Now we have a central suppliers, and it goes to them, they fulfill it, and it gets shipped out where we need it. And we still need print. Let's be clear here around that. It drives customer preference, accessibility, all of those sort of things, but it's making sure we do it in the right way at the right time when it's appropriate. And then we've been looking at digital signatures, and this has been a real success story across Zurich. We've been driving huge volumes around this, moving people away from that feeling of having to sign documents and ship them around the globe, or ship them to their different offices because somebody has to put a wet signature onto it. And then there are, of course, the various digital platforms that support our business and our customers. And all of these tools together create an ecosystem that really have enabled us to move forward and really break that, that link to paper. So one of the other opportunities, and I think one of the most important things, is around changing behaviours. So COVID-19, we were already well on this journey before then, but it's really provided an opportunity to embed and accelerate some of the behaviours. People haven't been able to come into the office. Those anchors and those links and chains I was talking about earlier aren't available, so they've had to sort of start to embrace some of these digital channels that we use. That's really enabled the sort of flexible working and the shift. There's a lot of buzzwords around this, flexible, hybrid, but people want more flexibility in the future about where and how they work. And this has really given us an opportunity to ingrain these kind of activities into our sort of sustainability DNA. This is what we do. We don't print paper. We've seen our volumes drop hugely over the last few years through the success of this. But also it's given us a chance to bust some of those myths. I talked about digital signatures, people thinking they have to sign a document physically, that they have to provide things to the regulator, documents to the regulator in physical form. So what are the benefits? And just to sort of close off my piece here, I mean, obviously hybrid and flexible working, it now gives people choice how, when and where they work. It reduces the commuting emissions. If you're not coming in, you're not driving your car, fewer trains, less buses, it really starts to drive that cycle. Less office space. So even if you're sharing office spaces, the big monolithic buildings, we're having fewer of those. People aren't having to come in. flexible desk sharing, and that actually can help us drive improved customer outcomes. We talked about the inefficiency earlier. This now, digital's far quicker, more agile, and allows us to meet the challenges our customers set us. And of course, as Anya already outlined, the CO2 side of things, it really does help drive the change and meet our sustainability goals and ambitions. And with that, I'll hand back to Rebecca.
Thanks, Anya. Thanks, Darren. So I'd like to go ahead and hand it over to our final panelist today. So over to you, Henning.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. So I will quickly start with a short introduction. My name is Henning Müller. I'm working for Coca-Cola HBC since 2017. I've held positions in quality, safety and environmental areas. And since last year, I'm working there as the country quality and food safety manager. So I would like to start on the next slide with a question to open this discussion, which is how to identify actually sustainable companies, which is part of this presentation. And I believe many of you have probably heard about this topic already in the past. But I'd like to quickly summarize on how, if you look at a specific company, would you actually see is it sustainable or not? And there's a couple of certifications, etc., that would help you for this. So one of those would be the ESG ratings, which are focused on the environmental, social and governance risk a company has. And it was very nice to see that us, but also you as Zurich Insurance are on the leader side of this rating. So that's very nice to see. But more than this, there's also many different sustainable indices. I've put a couple of them down in the bottom, and this is usually what you find on the investors page of each company. So you can go to the next slide. So Coca-Cola HBC, you might not be familiar with the abbreviation HBC. HBC means Hellenic Bottling Company, so it's one of the biggest Coca-Cola bottlers in the world. We are present in 28 countries, producing 36 brands, and produce more than 12.5 billion liters every year. And you can see a bit, we're quite distributed in Central and Eastern Europe, but also Nigeria is part of the CCHBC group. Next slide, please. So I'm working for Coca-Cola HBC Switzerland, and I would quickly say something about the local setup that we're using in Switzerland. So in Switzerland itself, we have around 700 employees in 2 production sites. And this you would probably already notice Switzerland is normally not the cheapest production countries, but consumers here, they really value local production, etc. And it's also part of innovation and things that we can foster here that might not be possible in other countries. So in Switzerland, for example, we have 2 production sites. You can see the upper one, which is in the area of Zurich, and the lower one, which is Pfalz, which is our mineral water plant. The mineral water plant is actually the first fully climate neutral mineral water in Switzerland, and both of our production sites are certified with the AWS standard, which is a standard for water stewardship and sustainable use of water. You can go to the next slide. So looking at sustainability overall, of course, there's many different factors to look at, from the reduction of emissions over water reduction, world without waste, sourcing, nutrition, people and communities. However, today I would like to focus on 2 different topics. The first one is the Pfalzer mineral water, which you will see on the next slide. So as mentioned before, Pfalzer is the first CO2 neutral mineral water in Switzerland. And of course, CO2 neutral, climate neutral means here we're looking at the full supply chain. And compared to an insurance company, the full business setup is completely different. So we're handling with many raw materials that have to be transported to the factories. There we have a lot of product handling, we have a certain waste. Afterwards we have the transport to our customers. And each of our warehouses and everything uses a certain amount of energy. Storage in the supermarkets would also have to be considered. But also one of the big energy factors is, for example, the coolers at the customers. So whenever you go to a restaurant and you see a cooler where you find this mineral water in, you can be sure that all the emissions that are connected to this bottle that you find in this cooler is considered carbon neutral. So to achieve this, there's many different steps. One of them would be to, first of all, reduce all the emissions that would be possible, and this over the whole supply chain. But then also what we're working with is many different innovative technologies. And on the right side, you can see the carbon dioxide that we are using, and Anya has mentioned it before. She was talking about removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And this is exactly the technology that we're applying here. You can see in the middle of this slide, you see this quite big construction on a roof. This is a technology where you absorb carbon dioxide directly from the air. This carbon dioxide afterwards is liquefied and brought to a food grade standard, and afterwards is used for the Falsa mineral water to make it sparkling. On top of this, we're using 100% RPT. RPT is our abbreviation for recycled PT. So in general, I think in many countries now the idea is to increase more and more the amount of recycled PT in all PET bottles, and with Falsa we've achieved it also as one of the first mineral waters in Switzerland to have it 100% recyclable. But of course, you also have to mention that in the end, there will always be a certain leftover of emissions that are just not avoidable in the market. So these would be the ones that we took the commitment in Falsa to fully compensate all leftover emissions. You can go to the next slide. So I already mentioned PT recycling, and what you can see here is also, I think it's important to know because there's different kinds of recycling, and in many recycling circles, you would see that you would use PET bottles to make T-shirts or other kinds of plastic to make pens or umbrellas, for example, from recycled materials. However, the good thing about the PET circle is that we're actually talking about a closed loop recycling circle. So we would go from the filling and selling. Afterwards, the PET bottles would be collected, returned, sorted, and then we make actually new granulate and PET flakes from which new bottles are created. So what we have in place is a full bottle-to-bottle recycling to make it as sustainable as possible, and not like on the left to have certain materials that would end up as a T-shirt or as a pen that in the end would be, for example, a kind of waste that you wouldn't be able to recycle anymore, but you would really have the closed circle. And as you can imagine, all those initiatives to take the carbon dioxide from the air instead of doing it the conventional way, closing all these RPT circles, in each case, we're talking about investments. Also, the data that must be picked up. It's an investment to make things measurable, to fully understand the supply chain, the emissions from the very first to the very last step of the supply chain. And therefore, it's always a big commitment as a company. And then you can go to the next slide. And here you can see this is something very important, and I've already seen that Zurich Insurance also has a lot of very ambitious and great targets for the next years. So from Coca-Cola HBC, recently there was the announcement to make sure that the whole company over all 28 countries has commits to net zero by 2040. Of course, this is a very big goal, considering that I think for countries like Switzerland, it will be very realistic. However, I think it's very important to consider that also countries like Nigeria and many countries in the east part of Europe are also part of this group. So it's a very big commitment where in the future, many solutions have to be found to achieve this. All right, thank you. And with this, I'm giving back to Rebecca.
Thanks, Henning.
Thank you.
So I'd like to go ahead and segue into our Q&A portion of our session today. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat, and we'll go ahead and address those questions.
As the audience is being a little bit shy, I already had a question, Rebecca. When we talk about climate change, we see that many companies are still taking it easy, and they don't include a sustainability plans in their strategy for the coming years. So do you think that we will reach a point of no return where everyone has to collaborate to resolve the situation? Or maybe we are already in that point. Who wants to answer it?
I can have a go. I think that's what's happening now, right? I can certainly say for Zurich, we have a clear sustainability strategy, and I know that there's further work going on, right? It's a continuous improvement approach. I think we can all accept that. I think there's further work going on to ensure that it is even more clear and more embedded into our strategy, and the collaboration piece. It's, again, whether it be through our customers or through our supply chain or just industry peers, I think it's only increasing. It's a very wonderful space to work in, because even if we're talking about competitors, we're not competitive in the sustainability space. And yeah, I can say from personal experience that that's definitely what's happening. David, I think, is gonna compliment.
Absolutely compliment, Rebecca. Yes, definitely. There are a couple of things I think to think of when you think about private sector and the contributions they make. One is the contributions to their own operations, and as we heard from both Henning and from Anya, both Coca-Cola and Zurich are taking great strides to play their part individually, in collaboration, to try and understand what their supply chains are doing and all of that kind of stuff. And I think that's a valuable role that the private sector plays. But the private sector is also an investor. And one of the things that came out of COP, for example, is that 450 of the largest banks, insurance companies, financial services organizations that have about $1.3 trillion under financial management between them, start to take seriously where they invest those funds, and start to think about the contribution that those funds can make towards the transition into beyond the fossil era, into a place where we are in a much more sustainable kind of world. So it's not just about the private sector doing what it can for its own business, but it's also recognizing the power that it has to be able to contribute to this wider requirement of putting more climate finance money into the space, so that people can transition in that kind of way that is fair and is equitable to all countries. Thanks.
Thanks, David. Thanks, Anya.
Yes, thanks, David, and thanks, Anya. I received 2 questions on my Teams account, so please, you can also put it into the official account. And I think the first question is for Henning. Regarding your climate neutral products, what are the next steps? Do you have more products in the pipeline, or what are your plans for the future?
Yes, definitely. So in general, the idea, as mentioned very recently, we had the commitment to net zero 2040. So to achieve this goal, definitely our Falsa mineral water in Switzerland was one of the very first products that we achieved this with. However, you can see the trend in many countries that more and more PET bottles are made purely from recycling material. So right now, with the rest of the portfolio, we have a portion of rPET, recycled PET, of 63%, and this target will increase over the next years. And the ultimate goal will be to go to 100% rPET for the full portfolio. However, what is currently our main challenge is actually the availability of recycled material. So what we're having in Switzerland and also in Germany and in many other countries are very well functioning recycling, sorting and returning systems for PET. However, this might not be the case in other countries like Nigeria, where all this infrastructure will have to be built up to ensure that enough recycled material is actually available to increase the rPET content in our portfolio.
Okay, thank you, Henning. And the second question, I think, David, because you mentioned this with Glasgow, I think you're the first contact person for it, but what do you think about the outcome of Glasgow? Do you think it will affect our business in a short-term way?
Yeah, thanks for that, Max. I think that there is Glasgow is very much like every other COP that has ever happened, in that you can look at Glasgow with a glass half full approach to it and say we've made some steps forward, that there is a trend, that is a direction of travel that is moving in the right way. Or you can look at it with a glass half empty kind of view and say it's an abject failure. We need to move farther and faster. The window of opportunity to save the world is closing and closing rapidly, and we aren't doing nearly enough to be able to meet that obligation in that window of opportunity. So I think the reality is it's probably somewhere in between, that there are some very positive things that we can take out of the conversations in Glasgow. For example, 40 countries coming together under the Methane Pact to reduce methane emissions by 30% by 2030. So that's in a very short time, taking 30% of methane out of their emissions. What that will do is that will materially affect global temperature rises by at least 0.2%. So it doesn't sound very much, 0.2, but when you're talking between the difference between 1.5 and 1.1, you know, our current situation and our target, 0.2 of that is enormous. It's half of the gap we've got left. So that in itself is a great kind of contribution that the countries are saying they're going to make. And there are a number of other examples that came out that are very positive in those kind of directions. The finance one that I mentioned in the previous answer, for example. The trouble is that when you take a look at all of the promises, we're still only going to be able to limit stuff to 2.4. So there's still a huge way to go to be able to halt this. 1.1 degrees is what we've got currently above pre-industrial averages. And if you take a look at the incidence of extreme weather, both the severity and the frequency of that over the last decade, for example, you can see the direction of travel of that is not going to get better anytime soon. We're all kind of hoping for 1.5, but 1.5 is still a third again as bad as we've already got. So it's bad now. It's going to get bad. It could get even worse. Into a position where it's unsustainable completely, unlivable planet. So we really do need to take action to kind of drive these things down. But we also need to recognise that that's the way the world is going to go. The world is going to get progressively more risky. So if you think about that from an insurance business perspective, the kind of the things that then impact on us as a business are going to become more risky. Now, how do we deal with that? Well, this is where I think the adaptation agenda definitely comes alongside the mitigation agenda. The more we can do to help communities reduce the risk they're facing from these events. So we can't necessarily stop the rain, we can't stop it becoming too hot in the short term, but what we can do is we can help people cope with that and deal with that. And if we can do that, if we can push ourselves into that agenda, promote the work that we're doing directly with communities, for example, and get others to take that up, then we can help manage risk. And if we can manage risk, then we have a viable insurance business that can walk alongside that process and manage risk along the same time. So there are some positive news coming out of COP. There is not enough of it. There needs to be much more, and we need to be acting faster and going further. I hope that's helpful.
Yes.
I'm trying to be positive and upbeat.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you for that. Anyone else from the panel who would like to?
Well, I have a question. As we are talking a lot about what the companies can do and what we can do, what is the least that we could do as individuals to help make our companies a little bit more sustainable? Like the minimum thing, because everyone has to collaborate. It's like, for instance, if you don't want to focus all your actions to make your company sustainable, what are the best practices that you can do, like a few we win? Who wants to answer it?
I can have a go at it. I think it's about making conscious decisions in terms of, you know, some of your daily behaviors. Travel is a big one. I think most companies are reporting on business travel as part of their emissions, and they're making, you know, they're including it in their ambitions to reduce emissions. But that requires individuals to say, do I really need to take this trip? You know, how can I get the most value out of this trip, right? I think COVID has shown us business can happen without the face-to-face, right? But I wouldn't even say all travel is bad and evil, right? I think there's certainly value-added examples, right? And I think, you know, we're trying to figure out, well, what does that mean? What's the right level? What's enough? And we're on that path right now. We're asking ourselves those questions. But as individuals, I think it's incredibly important that you all take accountability, you know, for that decision, right? Because your manager can come up with guidelines and the company can come up with, you know, best practices, but individually really take accountability for that. That's probably one of the biggest ones. Private car ownership, right? I think depending on the markets that you're in, that electric vehicle is getting, you know, coming closer, right, in terms of price range. So maybe your next car could already be an electric vehicle, and putting yourself on the path to being able to make that decision. And then I think it's not to, you know, overlook the small things you do in your day to day. I mean, Henning, I love this plastic bottle story, right? Because, you know, I think people are so used to thinking, oh, well, this is recyclable, you know. Well, it's not going to guarantee that it's going to be recycled, right? And I mean, of course, in Switzerland, we do probably have some very high recycling rates. But, you know, maybe avoiding that bottle to begin with really needs to be the first decision that you make. And then the day-to-day kind of turn off the lights in your house when you're not in the room, and just being more conscious. And the great, wonderful thing is when you start to be conscious about sustainability, it's like infectious, and you start thinking about it more and more and more. So just, yeah, keep it a focus. I think you'll be surprised at, you know, those little differences add up. And David.
Yeah, just to reinforce that, Anya, I think it's the being conscious. I don't think there's anybody perfect around here who will do everything possible and will never make a mistake and will never emit carbon and all that kind of thing. I think it's almost impossible to hold yourself up to that kind of standard, but being conscious of it at least makes you ask the question about whether you should or whether you shouldn't. So if I need to go to Zurich, how do I do that in the best way possible? Do I do it on Teams? Can I get away with that? Or do I use the train to go from the UK to Zurich? Takes a bit longer, probably costs a little bit more in terms of the finances at the moment, but the carbon emissions are 200-300 times less to use the train than to use a plane, for example. So there are simple things that you can then ask yourself about what you can do, and it isn't about saying I can do nothing, I can emit nothing. It's very much challenging yourself. So just to reinforce that point, Anya, I think it's a great point.
Yeah, I fully agree. Also from my side, and to me, it was also fantastic to see what has actually happened during the last 1.5 years. That people suddenly saw how much is possible to be digitalized. As you've already mentioned, all the printing, etc. It's not happening so much anymore because there's also the physical distance between the people, and probably one of the biggest factors is the whole traveling, and to see which other ways are actually possible to communicate with each other without creating such a high amount of CO2 emissions. Thank you.
Yeah, and one from me, Max. I think echoing what David and Anya said about people taking responsibilities for their actions, but also actually sharing the ideas that you have, because often, especially in my world, the people that are closest to the processes and the problems sometimes have the best ideas, and there certainly isn't, again, touching on the point, one size fits all approach to any of this. So share the ideas and the knowledge that you have.
And sorry to come back on one more thing, just while I remember it. DocuSign is the most fantastic thing that I think we've ever introduced. Partly because it's so simple, I don't need to print anything out, and I don't need to put a physical signature on anything, which is just great. But it's also improved the speed at which we conclude agreements, because I can send out a signature to everybody I need to, and within hours sometimes I've got everything I need to have completed a deal. It's just amazing how you can take digital technology and move it from convenience tool, something that makes it easier to do business, to something that makes it faster and more efficient as well, which is just fantastic. So just thought I'd plug DocuSign while I was here. Thanks.
So these are really, really great ways to get involved. I think one thing to consider as well, if you're trying to look for ways to get involved within your company, is seek out like-minded people. See if your company has green teams or champions networks. And, sometimes it's easier to find out where you can make the biggest dent within your organization, as well as all these great tips that our panel has shared with us today. So definitely seek out, resource groups within your own organization and see how you guys can come together. And if you don't have one, you can start one. It's a great way to make a big impact.
I have a question. Since you have talked about how much the COVID has helped to show that it is not necessary to travel so much, for instance, do you consider that a hypothetical future where everyone is working from home will be the ideal scenario for sustainability? Who wants to answer it?
I think there's still a value in offices. I still think it's meaningful to see your colleagues and speak with them and sit down and have lunch with them, and that personal, that soft connection, right? I think that's still valuable. Plus I miss it so much, being able to be in a meeting room and just feel the energy, right? I mean, those are value-adding opportunities. Do they need to happen as much as they did in the past? Maybe not, but again, it's also going to be, depending on your personal scenario. If you happen to live very close to the office and you can take a train or bike or drive your electric car, why not? Why not take advantage of that space, right? And then, I do think there will be more remote workers, that there'll be bigger portions of kind of remote workers, but I also think that there's a new kind of worker out there now. That's the I'm remote, but I go into the office whenever I want, right? And I don't think we've figured out how to call that and define that from like an employment perspective. But I think offices are not a thing of the past. I think they still add value. We just need to figure out the right amount, size, makeup, right? Internal makeup, infrastructure. But Darren, I think you also were going to add something.
Yeah. Just building on that, Anya, I think absolutely the way we use the offices are completely changing. Just the days of the battery desking and people just coming in and staring at a screen. Yeah, there's little value in doing that that sort of quiet space work, and it's really about, I think, shifting to sort of collaboration, sharing ideas, learning. Really, I mean, that's the other thing why I think it's still important to have those connections. We learn as much through our connections and the people we work with and come together with than just formal learning practices. So I still absolutely think there's a place for the office.
I can only also agree from our side. We normally call ourselves a people business because especially where you produce and you're next to a production line, of course, there's no other way of being present. However, we also have so many office jobs that in the last years have been done almost fully remote. But now I think after the pandemic, there will be a return to the office, but as Anya already said, it will not be to the extent that it has been before, but we will most probably find a balanced way of mixing the best parts of being in the office and to also meet other colleagues, but also with I think for many people it was also a certain convenience to be able to work from home to a certain extent. So that will be a mix. David.
Thanks, Henning. So just the kind of picking up on a word that Darren said, which was collaboration, and I think that the world is moving into a space where we need to remember that the reason that the human race is successful is because we collaborate together. It's actually one of the things that mark us out as a species, is that we have this ability to collaborate for success. So I think that as Darren said, the role of the office is changing, but I think the role of travel, the role of engagement, the role of the way in which people work is also changing to this much more collaborative model, where you don't meet for transactions. You can do transactions digitally. You meet for relationships, you meet for kind of engagement and sharing and that collaborative spark that generates innovation and generates change. And I think that's the kind of future. And, you know, taking us back to that kind of idea about when you can travel, making the decisions about travel may well be, can I do this deal using a DocuSign thing and just send off an electronic signature? Or is it about building something together? And if it's building something together, then that face-to-face, there is something about face-to-face working and collaborating that is really difficult to replace digitally.
Now we have a question in our chat. It says, from the perspective of sustainability, wouldn't be an idea to have plant-based cafeterias for the employees?
In terms of our sustainable food program, we are absolutely considering how can we find that right balance of ensuring that we're keeping and creating a positive experience so people even go into make the decision to even eat at the employee restaurant, but of course teaching and encouraging the more sustainable choices, you know, when we're selecting our meals. So there will absolutely be an increased focus on plant-based food within our menus moving forward, and a reduction in the more high carbon intensity red meat. We are not going, you know, vegan across the board, right? We're not doing the extreme, because again, it is also really important that you have a food program that people are happy with, right? And that they enjoy, right? If they're not enjoying it, then why have one at all, right? So yeah, really popular topic these days.
So if there are no more questions, I can only thank you, all of you, for participating in this very interesting session, and I hope to see you in the next one. Thank you very much, all of you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.